I should have said kia ora, sorry, to start with. I thought it was appropriate, while we do work across different typologies, housing is probably our first, well, is our first love and probably our key focus. And also, I think probably like New Zealand, Australia is having an enormous, sorry, I'm totally blinded by that light. We are under huge pressure with the housing crisis in Australia with cost of living and also diminishing social housing stock. This is our team of 13. I started the practice about 18 years ago, and I'm very lucky to have such a good team that I work alongside each day. I suppose I'd say that we're interested in the tension between civic generosity and the need for privacy and retreat for inhabitants of homes. As our cities densify, we are living closer to one another. It's interesting to look to more European and Asian models of living where people connect on the street and living in courtyard housing typologies, apartments and townhouses is commonplace. In contrast, the fortification of our Australian suburban sprawl housing, where people drive into their garage to enter their home, providing fewer opportunities to connect with neighbours and passerbys. Sorry, this clicker is, there we go. To compare two of my favourite houses in Western Australia, even though I'm a Victorian, Subiaco House by Vokes Peters, it actively engages with the street. The house mediates its publicness with the siting of program and operable panels to engage or to screen. And in complete contrast, the Cloister House by Mork, which I've been lucky enough to visit. While austere and brutal in appearance, it's located on a busy suburban street. The house responds to its context. The client's brief was for a house to retreat, to compensate for their hectic travel schedule. It's an incredibly calming house to be in. So what do these houses say about the people that live in them? And have we been conditioned to live in a certain way? Which house would I prefer to live in? And how do we strike the right balance? This tension is of great interest to me. One project where we've tested this is our Courtyard house, which is recently finished and only just recently photographed. Located in Albert Park in Boonwurrung country in Melbourne. The existing site had very little private open space, most of which was shaded throughout the day. That's the back. So we actually were required to build in a heritage, we were kind of in a heritage manner to complement the local streetscape. A walled courtyard typology, locating a 40 square metre courtyard, we dissected a gable form typical of surrounding period houses and inverted it to maximise solar access to a garden and the surrounding windows. We basically mapped the site empty and looked at where the only pocket of sunlight was throughout the day, and that was in this kind of central courtyard which really generated that form. And this led to a walled courtyard typology, locating a 40 square metre courtyard in the centre of the site to offer garden outlook from both public and private zones of the house. So that ability to look across and then also look between. You can see there in the centre, actually the shower can essentially look to the kitchen. I will say it's really a house for two adults with visiting grandchildren, so it's probably one that we could kind of test the boundaries. And there is a small upstairs, a couple of bedrooms in the roof space. So here you see project architect Oliver standing in the shower while I'm standing in what will be the kitchen area. We wouldn't do that when it was finished. And that's the space now. And that's using the sort of roof space as another small living area upstairs. A louvered window aperture offers direct access and connection between the street and the walled garden, allowing the occupants to mediate their degree of connectedness. And here we were looking at the council's often very kind of interested and obsessed, I'd actually say, with this idea of kind of windows on street, even though we know that people are going to want to kind of put blinds down. So we used kind of a textured glass, but like the way that at night this battened entry could actually have a kind of a lantern effect but still be quite private during the day and night. Another project, Stable and Cart House, is a sensitive adaptation in North Melbourne and Wurundjeri country, engaging thoughtfully with the imperfections and idiosyncrasies of a 1920s brick warehouse. Surrounded by period houses and warehouse buildings. Original plans show a series of 10 horse stalls and cart dock, manure bins and large feed loft. Designed by the esteemed architect Harry A. Norris, better known for designing Melbourne's iconic Nicholas Building and Mitchell House, as well as Burnham Beaches. The site had many uses over the years, including stable, ironworks, boxmaker, salvage warehouse, and more recently, a dressmaker's studio, where the tenant lived upstairs in what was originally the hayloft. So a model of the interior volume and a section of the existing space. Having owned the warehouse for 25 years, our client's retirement and relocation from the Blue Mountains was the catalyst to undertake the conversion. It remains an incredibly intact building despite the varied uses over the last 100 years, including the large timber sliding door with its wicket access gate. We were keen to engage with and preserve the rich history of the building's varied uses, all of which have left indelible marks on the building fabric. Defined by its 4 double-height perimeter walls, the existing stables presented an enclosed singular volume encumbered only by the original feed loft cutting through the central airspace. The overall project strategy was an exercise in restrained removal and repair only where structural integrity required intervention. Industrial patina, aged timbers and rusted corrugated roofing were characteristics of the historic interior to be retained and celebrated. So here we have the existing plan. And essentially the idea was to kind of cut a large opening in the roof. Double glazing, operable skylights for thermal purging and cross-ventilation, highly insulated rooms within the larger space worked to combat the thermal limitations of a 100-year-old double brick warehouse. So here you can see one of the strategies, I suppose, in trying to keep the brick walls, obviously a double cavity brick wall is not thermally stable, and so we left the slab intact. North Melbourne's renowned for in-ground contamination, so we left that to cap it. We insulated and then poured a new slab and then highly insulated the roof over the top. So I've just lost my place. There we go. Internally, the distressed roof is retained as the ceiling with a new highly insulated roof structure inconspicuously constructed above. The timber feed loft was partially removed to expose the full height of the interior, visually liberating the scissor truss and steel beams. Timber was salvaged and reused to complete the upper level construction. A solitary tree occupies the restrained garden courtyard formed at the centre of the plan by removing a portion of roof, allowing natural light and ventilation to permeate the interior. Here you see the new roof framing. From our shadow study analysis, we located the courtyard on the south to avoid overshadowing by the 4-storey northern neighbour. The design challenge presented itself as a paradox to introduce the obligatory domestic program while preserving the warehouse scale of the interior and memories of the past. A utility space at the entry allows for off-street parking but doubles as an entry threshold to the home. So here's the plan. So you've got bedroom, kitchen, the entry kind of forecourt which allows a car park. Anyway, it's all fairly self-explanatory to architects in the room. So domestic zoning occurs around the courtyard with the insertion of rich blackbutt clad rooms, primarily containing spaces for utility or those that require privacy. And here the sliding doors of the bedroom, which allow it to open up to the courtyard or be more contained. And here the first floor, which has another bedroom, a bathroom and a bathhouse. Timber-lined bathhouse explores opportunities for spatial connection. The blackbutt battened balustrade, which is just out of camera, allows occupants to engage or retreat from the courtyard below. The stairs' rust-toned hue rhymes with the patina of the rugged surrounding surfaces. So here's the construction. The steel worker did a fantastic job. But is clearly expressed as a new element within the interior. It goes beyond its utility, playfully engaging with existing structural members. Sorry, having clicker problems. Providing opportunities for elevated vantage points and dividing the expansive living space into more intimate spaces. Our objective was to maintain the atmosphere of the original place as a humble alteration that values the past, preserving it for the future for its occupants and the context within which it sits. So our next project, I suppose we really delight in finding solutions to clients' needs, and I think we always are more interested in projects, unusual projects, and perhaps ones with more constraints because we find them kind of more of an ability to leverage or I suppose, a departure point in which to find the solution and a design. So this client bought the site in Dramana, which is in the Mornington Peninsula on Boonwurrung country, as she loved the view. However, daily use of a wheelchair makes living on a hill more difficult. The house explores how she can enjoy the landscape from various vantage points. There are 3 pavilions connected via a steel pink entry ramp and a bridge, inspired by the many shades of pink in Sedum Autumn Joy. She was obsessed with pink, and that was not my favourite colour, so we had to find a way of bringing that colour in. So Kurt here is highlighted in pink, so that's the entry ramp, and then there's this kind of pink bridge that connects the various pavilions, north being to the right of the page. The house curtains are used throughout as a device to screen utility zones like the laundry, robe, study and lift. So it's a little hard to see, but actually going into her bedroom there's actually the laundry. So we kind of tried to avoid having designated rooms and almost used curtains as devices to kind of screen off elements. And below, on the lower level, the house will accommodate 3 generations of women with the ability to sublet the lower level as a separate apartment in the future for passive income. We design spaces to enable as much independence as possible. The kitchen with wheelchair, turning circle and knee clearances in work zones. And the Botta-inspired bridge under construction where our client will enjoy her garden from above. So as you can see, not yet properly photographed, but just finished. So not like that, not in the photos, but it's finished. So we really enjoy projects where we can make a difference, and we're currently delivering a specialist disability apartment building for residents with high physical needs in this project in Altona. The project will include a ground floor cafe, a social enterprise providing vocational training and support for the long-term unemployed and young people with a disability, as well as a communal rooftop for therapeutic horticulture. We're also underway with a social housing project in Bendigo in regional Victoria, delivering 35 independent living units for Winteringham, a community housing provider who specialise in care for over 50s who are homeless or at risk. So this is on a large 7,000 square metre site, so it's all quite low density. And Nightingale Village. The site is in Brunswick on Wurundjeri country. It's located to the south of the Commons, which is there in the darker blue, Nightingale 1, and Nightingale Anstey, Wurra Big Precinct and Nightingale North Walls, so it's really part of a precinct transformation. The site is bounded by the upfield train line, the bike path to the west, and low residential on either side of the tracks, and then a commercial strip on Sydney Road to the east. This pocket of Brunswick has seen rapid densification over the past decade, and very little of it is desirable. In 2014, Breathe Architecture completed the Commons, which then led to Nightingale 1. Austin Maynard Architecture and our practice, CCA, amongst others, were silent investors in Nightingale 1, keen to support a necessary shift in the multi-residential offering in Melbourne. This is Duckett Street, our site, a collection of single-storey light industrial warehouses across 12 titles. And this was the scheme that had planning permission that the original owner was proposing to build. However, Nightingale was an opportunity to deliver a truly diverse, fine-grained housing project, a village collaboration by many hands. And here the 7 practices involved. Generously, Wellington sold their site to Moreland City Council to enable us to build, or for council to build, a new public park. And here, a collection of some of the architects and project architects on the project. So that was Wellington's scheme. And then that was the park that was built, which was fortunately to the north of our site. So this is the site and each of the buildings. As well as design architect, each practice was the developer for their project. And I think that's another whole separate lecture and learning that I could talk about. Collaboration, though, was an important aspect of the project. And really, I think Nightingale Village is far more than the sum of its parts. The 6 firms worked closely together, established practices mentoring emerging practices. Not that I felt that we were emerging, but we hadn't actually designed a multi-residential project before. There was energy and ideas coming the other way. Collaboration also took the form of peer reviews involving all practices in the design phases, resulting in shared knowledge, but also architectural outcomes, such as the shared light court between Evergreen and Parklife, which provides such great amenity to those buildings. Collaboration was also evident in the delivery methodology, 1 drawing set from our documenting architect table, 1 contract and 1 builder. The efficiency of this cooperation had concrete expression in the shared services and facilities. A single substation and car park entrenching between sites. We acquired and purchased sort of below ground land for $300,000 so that we could kind of share trench services across the street, all of which allowed the facades to be freed up for maximum activation, as highlighted here. Pedestrian access. Duckett Street, through extensive consultation with Marybeck Council and designed with open work, the village was able to pedestrianise most of Duckett Street for the benefit of the broader community, that hatched area. Each building set back from their tidal boundary to create a new local pedestrian laneway we call the Southern Mews. So you can see where the tidal boundary actually would have sat. And the internal lane within Parklife connecting Duckett Street and the park on ground floor. Here shows our extensive ground plane vegetation, and here off Hope Street, the busiest street, which is the access to the basement below, which has 14 share car, Go-Get, which is a car share company that the broader community can access, not just the people living in the village. Highlighted places to stop for incidental interaction within the building fabric and Duckett Street. Setting back from the edge of the upfill bike path to define a more generous relationship with buildings and the path, as well as provide opportunities for pedestrian refuge, pause points and greening. Those building columns too, I should say, were also needed to support or prevent protect the buildings in the event of train derailment. So we were dealing with a whole lot of kind of interesting issues, as well as a $250 million public liability policy we had to take out, building next to the train lines. And there's 470 bikes across the village, some of the bike parking within Parklife. Vertical circulation is located at the edge of the buildings to maximise natural light and ventilation and encourage use. Despite the single documenter and builder, each building has a distinct identity and character, an essential aspect in establishing the 6 individual Nightingale communities. This is especially evident in the various entries and lobbies to the buildings, seen on every edge. Landscape and rooftop gardens. were critical, designed by different landscapers, Openwork, Eggersley Garden Architecture and Amanda Oliver. Places for introverts and extroverts, groups, individuals and pets. Spaces for recreation and somewhere to dry the washing adjacent to rooftop, communal laundries in each building. And then we have 8 commercial tenancies which were curated, as in the tenants were curated and purchases, located on the ground floor. Curated to ensure that really that they benefited the village and the broader local community. In the bottom of ours, a group of residents actually got together and bought the tenancy so that they could rent it at below market rate to a social enterprise, which is a bike repair. There's a florist, there's a little Japanese grocer, there's a psychologist, and it's been a really great groundswell. So the sustainability was an enormous part of the initiatives, and again, I won't go into it in too much detail, but key things, zero gas, 100% green power, large solar arrays, embedded networks, energy recovery systems, no air conditioning, although some apartments do have that. Some of the community housing providers need mechanical systems, and the car share as it goes on. Social housing. This is Val in Evergreen in our building. We sold 27 of the apartments were pre-sold to community housing providers, Housing Choices Australia and Women's Property Initiative. And these were blind integration, builds seamless, cohesive communities within the village. Building and nurturing community is a core value in Nightingale. The resident groups of each building were formed before construction even began and started to form supportive networks, friendships, respect and kinship. The architecture fosters connection, spontaneous interaction, and the self-selecting groups tend to share values and values and priorities. The buildings are quite raw and encourage resident expression through gardening, furnishings and activities. Importantly, the communities are comprised of people of all ages and diverse family units, reflecting the reality of our wider community. So apartment types. We originally, Nightingale Housing, which was, I suppose, the organisation that we all sort of sought our licences from, and they also ran the balloting system when we were selling the apartments. They were nervous about us including 3-bedroom apartments, and we were adamant that that was what we wanted to do because most of our work was doing family homes. Urban Coop, which is more of a co-housing project, they already had an existing population of residents that had come together and were looking for a site for a long time, so they also include 4-bedroom apartments. So here, Claire and her children. There's a 3-bedroom. Rowan and Alyssa's 2-bedroom. There's a 1-bedroom. And then we also have Tile House, which is a studio apartment ranged between 25 and 35 square metres, which was sold for around $300,000, aimed for first home buyers. So this is ours, Sophie and Cam. We had 2 in our building, and they've proved to be very successful. So building the bed in that can be opened and closed up. There are 6 buildings with 6 distinct architectural sensibilities and imperatives. So I thought I would include some short summations in the architect's own words. Evergreen is our building. And I thought I'd just take you through some of the plans actually before I go through the words. So ground floor, we have our own bike store, the commercial tenancy. We've got 27 apartments. That's our level 6 rooftop. And then the communal laundry, the drying yard and little veggie garden. But for us, Evergreen was a framework for a community to flourish. A neighbour, a connection, a garden, a home. Park Life by Austin Maynard Architects. With its distinctive mountainous roof line and a unique rooftop amphitheatre, Park Life is a community-focused building with a variety of social and communal areas that achieve an energy rating of 9 stars. Left Field. For Kennedy Nolan, Their Nightingale was an exercise in providing the quality and domestic comfort of a single residential project for their residents using colour, texture, intensity, playful form, and an Amanda Oliver garden. Courtyard by Hable is designed from the inside out. The thoughtfully landscaped central courtyard gives the building its name and provides the formal mechanism to achieve a heightened sense of community, foster visual connection, abundant natural light and ventilation between all apartments. Sky House by Breathe. Sky House is a study in efficiency, material simplicity, small footprint living and affordability. Urban Coop by Architecture and Breathe. Urban Coop were a pre-established group wishing to live as an intentional community with shared facilities to support the desire to live with common purpose. So these are their apartments. This is the first vertical co-housing community of its kind in Australia. So they've got a large downstairs communal kitchen and lounge where they have, I think, fortnightly Friday night dinners. They've got music room, workshop, and so they had a lot more kind of communal spaces within their building. So there's much to say about this project and how challenging it was to deliver as an architect, especially as the developers. We embarked on this brave and substantial undertaking to effect positive change in what is a contentious market, and it seems to have had a discernible effect. We hope to deliver an authentic piece of city making, but now we have handed it over to the residents who are making it their home. Thank you.
But Claire, you touched on the projects that are affecting people's lives and communities. What is that doing to you as an architect and your practice? And how is that affecting you, and how are you growing and learning from these experiences of a developer and an architect?
Yeah, we definitely don't want to be a developer again. It was a bloody nightmare, and I'm still living it, so there's a whole extra half an hour I could talk about that. But no, I think as a practice where we had done a lot of single residential and then dabbled in, other little commercial projects, and I think never had any interest in doing any multi-res because I was so disenfranchised with what was being delivered that it was a kind of awful typology to work in. And that was why doing Nightingale was interesting, because it felt that there was that mentorship, there was that camaraderie and collaboration to do it with people who had done it before. I think it kind of coincided too with coming off the back of doing the national presidency, and I think that also pulls you out of practice. You have to lift your head up. It's very easy to be head down, bum up, delivering projects, putting out fires on a daily basis, and it's it can get a bit you can get a bit kind of focused on that. And I think with the role for the Institute, you're often looking much more broadly across what's affecting the country and people's lives, and so that kind of opened my eyes much more to it than perhaps before that role. And that coincided also with Nightingale, and just really wanting to think more broadly and maybe offer a new solution. And and for us, I think we've always had taken a lot of delight in working directly. We love the relationship and almost the emotional involvement and the intimacy of working directly with people. But at the same time, I think we all know that there's only a small part of the population that can commission a bespoke project. And so for us, it was really, how do we I've always been a big believer that good design should be available to everyone, and that your quality of environment has substantial, meaningful effect on your daily behaviour and way of being. And so there's something quite interesting about designing a building when you don't know who's going to live in it. And so often we talk in the office about putting ourselves in that position. So we're often kind of designing with that, whether you call it empathy or just, I suppose, thought. So I don't know. So and interestingly, going through that process, which it's been going for 5 or so years, it's completely changed how we approach what projects we take on now. So we still very much love doing bespoke projects, bespoke housing, but really, while we've also gone on to do other private development work, the whole office we really don't enjoy. sorry if there's any developers in the room, we don't enjoy doing the private development work as much. I think there's often a different focus of what the outcome, well, there's different imperatives. We really enjoy, and actually technically, I mean, Nightingale was a private development, but it was a huge learning curve. We developed relationships with social housing, community housing providers. We're doing, as I touched on, there's another housing choices project we're doing at the moment, which will be delivered in February. And our main focus now will be, if we do multi-res, it will be social housing. We just think it's such an important typology that has really, there's a lot of investment and there's a lot of importance being put on that now, but it's been completely underfunded for decades. And so we kind of feel that that's, if, I don't know, as architects, there's a lot of, you've got to have a lot of tenacity and passion for the projects you're working on because they go for a long time and you want to be inspired by the work you're doing. And I know me and definitely the team are far more motivated to work hard for the end user on those projects.
Claire, you mentioned that you weren't overly excited about the development and the multi-unit residential development you were seeing. What's your comment now in terms of how Nightingale Village is changing what others are doing in the wider Melbourne region or inner city region? Is it having an effect on the market? Are people doing things differently?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, Nightingale is not a solution to everything at all, but Jeremy McLeod will often say, once the, you know, if the system has changed or Nightingale becomes redundant, they've kind of done their job. It was really about shaking up the market. There has been quite significant change in the offering. There's obviously different bands of developers. There's always been some good quality, more, I hate the word boutique, but more boutique developers that are delivering kind of better quality design outcomes, better quality builds. However, sustainability was probably never really a key, and even community, kind of trying to foster community within buildings was probably never a key focus. And a lot of those developers now, that's a really big part of what they're delivering. I think the initiatives too with eradicating gas from developments, until recently it was mandatory. You had to have a gas connection on a multi-residential because it was seen to be inequitable for a purchaser. Whereas now new legislation's come in the last 6 months where all new projects, including houses, cannot connect to gas, which is a fantastic development. So, and even with some of the work we've done directly for the government for Homes Victoria, when you read a year ago what their mandates were, there was a much more significant push for sustainability, even higher star ratings than what the building code or the National Construction Code require. So this real kind of shift.
In your project, Claire, you spoke about a single documenter being involved for the Nightingale project. Could you please elaborate further on how this worked and how it was set up?
Yeah, I mean, so what happened was we'd already established our development company. We had a licence from Nightingale. We'd looked at lots of sites and were underbidders regularly and kept missing out on sites. And so when this project came along, some of us were already established. So there was never an intention, there was never finding a site and then gathering the architects. It kind of happened the other way around. And the initial idea was that we would be responsible and deliver our own buildings. And we even had to kind of raise our own equity. So basically we sold shares to raise the equity to get our development off the ground. We had 24 investors who invested $100,000 blindly into our development company, which gave us the seed equity to kind of start the project. I won't go into too much detail, I promise, but essentially as the project was developing, it just made far more sense. It was going to be a logistical nightmare having 6, say, Tier 3 builders on close proximity. We felt that while the building costs perhaps going up to a Tier 2 builder, I don't know if you guys use that same terminology, but a Tier 2 builder, so a bigger, more kind of probably a unionised, an EBA builder, which has probably higher construction rates, was still going to be more cost effective because of the efficiency. And also given that as we developed the project further, we were going to share services and infrastructure across the building. So therefore we thought, well, you can't give that builder 6 sets of drawings and say, build it together. So we decided pretty early on that it was going to make much more sense to have a single documenting architect. Hable were by far the bigger practice, a couple of, 130 odd people in the Melbourne office and had been doing multi-res for the longest period of time. So they were willing to take on what what I think they thought was a poison chalice of documenting. We all got our project buildings to documentation to about 50% design development, and then basically gave our fees, most of our fees, over to Hable for them to kind of finish the project with design reviews, meetings, workshops, and then checking of the design documents as they went out. But similarly, they then were novated across to the builder during the build and had most of the fee for that as well. So it was a bit tricky because there's sometimes, particularly when you're trying to review shop drawings or suggested changes by a builder during the build, we basically had nothing. $3,000 a month, I think, was our fee during the construction, because we'd given it basically all to Hable, which didn't give us much time, but I suppose we just ended up spending it anyway, wanting to kind of check that the intent was kind of captured. I think there were a huge amount of learnings. I think having the executive architect, so to speak, was definitely the right approach. I think in future, if it was ever done again, and it won't, because it will now never be 6 individual developments where the architects are developer. I think it was a great seed project or grassroots project to get the idea up, and the whole reason we had to do that was there was no way banks or anyone was going to give us the funding, so we had to kind of find the seed capital. Now, because we've got National Australia Bank and super funds like Hester that are involved and supportive and see how it can be delivered, future projects that Nightingale Housing are running, Nightingale Housing now are taking on almost more that role as developer, acquiring the sites, sourcing the funding, those kind of things, which makes far more sense logistically, and lets architects go back to doing what they know best, which is architecture and not development.
So just picking up on that theme, having been a developer, what would you suggest for architects working with developers to improve the quality of architecture and the outcomes that are delivered?
I think the thing that, given that we hadn't been doing much development work, but I was hearing it all the time from colleagues, and then I was still seeing it when we were taking on other multi-res project with developers, that there's such a... architects do tend to get a bit relegated from the value management phases, from the budget management. I'm just working on projects at the moment where we're totally on the outer of it. Some developers could see that we had developed all this, I suppose, empathy for what developers go through and the risk and the challenges, and the understanding that ultimately the project's got to stack up financially. So on the flip side, some have valued that and then brought us more into the project. I think the thing that we try and advocate is that architects are often really well placed. I think developers think we're, motivated more by obviously only the aesthetics of, that we're motivated to drive the price up or to... But I think there is real value in having architects helping manage budgets, knowing where to take, make savings and where the money should be spent. And so I think that was a big learning. And while I've gone through the process, I don't plan to do it again. I do think it's a whole lot of learnings that will be valuable in the future.
And several of our in the audience today are keen on those lessons that you might be able to impart to create multi-residential and the project structure. You spoke about this being one of the first projects for your practice in terms of multi-residential. What have you learnt in terms of any differences between single residential and multi-residential in terms of the way you structure, deliver the projects, engagement? Is there anything different that you've learnt along the way?
Can you ask that again, Tina? Sorry.
I might ask a simpler one.
Okay.
Any tips or secrets for making your project more affordable?
You tell me. No, I think, maybe it leans back into what the previous question was. I think the learning from this project, we approached our project in Nightingale Village. The last thing we wanted to do was design something blue sky thinking and then have to cut and VM and have a really compromised outcome. So we started with a very stripped, very sort of simple building to start with. And I think for us, and then when we went on to design some other multi-res projects, like the Specialist Disability or the one we're doing for Housing Choices in North Melbourne, it's almost...
we find with those, we kind of enjoy the challenge that they've got to be quite utilitarian, but how do you bring that tactility or the kind of domestic qualities that it's someone's home? And I naturally gravitate to quite, I like tough materials, and obviously not everyone, wants to live in a grey concrete bunker, but if things can be embedded, or if there's care given to the things that are essential, they can't be cut out, basically, is I suppose the way I'd look at it. And we're always looking at using, how can we use tough materials that are going to last a long time. And while I'm still working through defects with the builder 16 months after practical completion, the thing I keep saying to them when they want to cut corners or not fix something or not change what should have been built in the first place is these buildings need to look good in 30, 40 years' time, and that's what we were really looking to try and build. It's a very different mentality to a house, even though we do have that same lens when we're designing houses, that we think how is this going to have longevity, and I think that's a very important thought from a sustainability perspective, because the resources that we're using to build these structures, what we don't want to be doing is building them and knocking them down in 15, 20 years' time. So we know that joinery might wear out and fittings might need replacing, but if the bones and the fundamentals, and particularly, looking at this image here of Kennedy Nolan's, there's a the materiality is sound. It's kind of brick. And you look at Edwardian houses that have been Victorian houses that are around for 130, 140 years, and they still look as good as they did when they were built. So how do we design buildings to really wear in rather than wear out?
One of the questions coming through is, what are some of the design non-negotiables for residential projects that you have?
I suppose we found that our role often when we're designing residential houses is educating client. We're often explaining to clients what our design moves are and why we're making them. And a lot of that, the starting point for us always is, A101 orientation, siting, aspect, cross ventilation, passive solar, all of those absolute principles, which we all think are super simple and should be achieved. But it's interesting to see occasionally, or with maybe non-architecturally designed work, how commonly things are not following that. So I think there's just no excuse with those. And even when sometimes you've got a really difficult south-facing site down a hill, a north, it's like, how do you get that northern light in? How do you get cross ventilation? And so it's interesting. I think we all take for granted how much we understand how buildings function, how we can passively heat and cool our houses, but I think it's upon us to impart that information to our residential, or all clients really, to know how to use their spaces in a passive way. And I think now with the rising cost of utilities and cost of living, I think almost the dollar has made clients kind of more in tune with wanting to seek that as well, rather than just flick a switch to cool a house down.
The proximity of the train was obviously a challenge, both...
Never developing a site next to a train.
What people are wanting to know is, outside of the train and solving some of those challenges that related to it, and obviously having a hefty insurance policy was one of those, but how do you characterise and celebrate the success of the Nightingale project? What thing would you actually identify as a huge success, and what do you celebrate through that project?
I think for me the celebration is the contentness of the residents, and I'm back there quite often in the buildings. I've still got my GMK that I can walk around the public spaces when I'm walking people through, and there just is the residents are so happy with what they have bought. Because we balloted in 2019 and then we finished in July last year, so it was about 3 years from balloting to moving in. And so, as I said in the talk, the community was really establishing itself, and each building was had a WhatsApp group and was, because there was we would meet with them online because it was during lockdown every 6 weeks to give them updates and tell them how the project was going and gather feedback from them on if there were opportunities to go one way or the other, to kind of get feedback from our residents. And so I think that's that's the delight, and that is often the delight that we get with our single res too. It's not that kind of egomaniac standing back looking at the kind of, how good the house looks from the street. It's those moments of when the clients are kind of a bit shocked that it's their house and they get to live in it for the next little while. We really delight in that.
Do you think there's potential for the Nightingale project concept to be translated in the suburban context, so the 4 to 12 unit scale, as opposed to the Nightingale Village that you spoke about?
Yeah, I definitely do. I don't know. I know that Nightingale Housing have got some things in the works. I think they are even looking at that, more of a horizontal model. So I know they've struggled to get it up and running in Sydney. I think there's one that SJB are working on just because of land prices. But in some respects, I don't really see why land prices... Nightingale, there was words originally bandied around of affordability, and I don't think that's right. Nightingale, it's more... there are levers that are employed with, because they're efficient, therefore they're cost effective to run. So there's elements that make them more affordable to live in, but they're not affordable housing in the term what we have in Australia, which is below market rent or below market cost. But what you get for your money, there's a lot of longevity and quality that's been designed into it. So in my mind, what the land costs should be, you'd think, irrelevant, because it's kind of all relative to what things are going for in that particular area. However, Brunswick, for those who know Melbourne, Brunswick's on the north, the cool north. I live in the south. The south side, where real estate prices traditionally have been higher, although I reckon it's completely flipping, they keep saying, we can't do it in the south because it's south of the river, because land prices are more expensive. It's also the values of the people that want to live in them, and the people that want to live in probably Nightingales with shared laundries, shared rooftops. There's much more of a shared values of the people that have bought into the building. They're probably not people that do reside in the south who, might want private car ownership and those kind of things.
You're probably one of the best people to ask this question, having been president of the Australian Institute of Architects, a developer, founder of a practice. How can architects better advocate for better commissioning of these projects that deliver important social outcomes for communities across country, whether that be here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, inner city Melbourne, etc.?
One thing is making sure that, I'm going to start with fees, but more, commissioning. I think what was interesting about this was you can't sit back and wait for policy to change. And what was happening with all of the most of the multi-res that was being delivered in Melbourne, it was typically being built bigger developers, any developers, but generally going to practices that had delivered multi-res over and over again, and big practice, medium practice, whatever. But I think what's interesting with this new kind of wave and a new perspective and a realisation of the importance of this typology, and I'd also say for a long time in Australia, apartment living was seen as a kind of not a choice. It was like early in life or later in life, and it's really if you can't afford a house. Whereas in Europe, we know that's completely the opposite, and many people live in apartments. And I think by offering up good housing options, people are making a choice that they want to live in an apartment, and they're choosing not to. They don't want a house. And there's reasons, because they're happy with a private balcony when they get to share the rooftop. I know I'm getting a bit off topic, but so I think the commissioning is, we need to be making sure that we're delivering better quality, longer lasting, more efficient to run, and making these places people are choosing to live in, not because it's the only place that they can afford. And then in that commissioning, why I say fees is I think it's so important that developers, and I think a lot of them are starting to see that actually when they look at the feasibility and they look at all the, I can't get rid of concrete, can't get rid of the cars, can't get rid of the windows. Oh, architect fees. Oh, we could cut that out, and just get a drafty. That saves a few $100,000. So it has often been they'd get an architect, fire them after the planning approval, and then get a drafty to finish it, which is just, and then of course the drafty, no offence to drafties, but someone like a building designer to finish it, and or even in-house at the builder. So I think developers are starting to see the real merits and the importance that good design doesn't have to be expensive. And I would advocate that, we need to not be cannibalising the profession. It's not about being, what's it called? A cabal. We're not going to lock our fees in together, but it is really important, because that was a real problem, I think, in Australia for a while, that fees were just, everyone was undercutting, and you can't deliver good quality architecture if you don't have the right amount of fees, even though I did work for free for 3 years on this.
I think the word was cartel.
Not a cabal. That's wrong word.
But we'll use cabal. Just to round out this afternoon's question, and I think the last one here is probably going to touch on tip and secret potentially. Final question for this afternoon. How do you maintain the quality of design output in your studio when it's so essential to that service, that value, that offering, the relationship to fee, etc.? How do you ensure that high quality output of design is coming through and maintained through each and every project?
It's something, I think, I suppose the one thing I would say, in some respects, I'm not saying fees, because there's, fees, I think as all architects we know, we're not paid nearly enough within the construction industry. We're probably the lowest paid out of any, but it's something that I think we discuss in the office a lot, and that our primary focus is what we're delivering and the quality of the work we're delivering. However, I'm very interested in the commercial viability and realities of practice, and I run a pretty tight ship that I think a lot of people, when people do leave the practice, they often go and start their own practice, which I'm always immensely proud of, because I feel like they've had they kind of are leaving knowing a lot, because it's very transparent, and we talk a lot in the office about everything from kind of dramas to contracts to insurance and all those things. So I think it's something that often architects shy away from, because we see ourselves as creative, with a creative pursuit, but we don't need to live as impoverished artists. And I think we, as people who run practices, I think have a responsibility to be running commercially viable businesses. We don't do competitions very much at all. There's a really big culture of competitions in Australia, which is unpaid, and particularly Melbourne is, I think, run really badly compared to Sydney, which companies just burn hundreds and thousands of dollars. And often I think, that's why practices are often expecting staff to work back unpaid overtime, long hours, burnout, all of those kind of things. So I think practices have a responsibility to run commercially viable, but that doesn't mean they have to be driven by the dollar. It's trying to get that balance right. And so, I suppose my role, I find, is trying to win the right work. I'm much more strategic about the work in the last few years that we take on, probably in the last 8 years. The first 10 years I took pretty much anything that came along, because I was just excited someone wanted us to do something. And we have a lot of jobs you'll never see the light of day. But now I kind of think, okay, we keep the practice small. I've got no intention of getting any bigger. So we're very strategic about what we take on. We want values-aligned clients. We want reasonable fees. Sure enough, I just recently priced 2 jobs and I've totally underbaked them, and we're working for nothing again. But it's setting that foundation so that our team can work, and that we have enough time in there for design and documentation, realisation, and then also following through, working with really good contractors and trades at the end, and having strong working relationships. It's really a tripartite relationship, and I am married to a commercial builder, so I have to like builders, but I think the builders, we can't deliver what we're designing if we don't have, nurture those relationships. So that's it.
Thanks, Claire. On behalf of Te Kahui Whaihanga, thank you for your generosity, not only for today's lecture, which I'm sure everyone has enjoyed, but also the generosity of giving up time to be on the New Zealand Awards jury. It is a big ask to be away from your practice, be away from your family. So thank you for generously giving that time to our awards program. Big thank you again to our partner APL for making the lecture possible this afternoon. And last but not least, a big thank you to each of you for turning out for today's lecture today. Thank you very much for doing that. And I hope that I'll see many of you again later on this evening at 6 o'clock for the New Zealand Awards, where we'll get to celebrate the very best of New Zealand architecture here in this venue. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of the year afternoon.